Let's return now to the Greek Prime Minister's meeting with Vladimir Putin in Moscow. It's led to some fears in Brussels that Alexis Tsipras's government is attempting to strengthen ties with Russia while distancing itself from the EU. We spoke to the Russia analyst William Promeranz of the Wilson Center in Washington.
What Russia is trying to do is find a way to separate Greece from the rest of the EU, at least in terms of its support for sanctions. In order for sanctions to be maintained on Russia, they will have to be renewed in June. And for that to take place, there has to be unanimity within the EU. So clearly Greece, which is has its own various difficulties with the EU, is very vulnerable. And it also has traditional trade with Russia that has been upset because of the sanctions. So what I think Putin is trying to do is to pursue a policy where he can divide the EU, potentially via Greece and other countries, and potentially end the sanctions against Russia. I think this is a very tall order for Putin to pull off. And looking at the results of the meeting, he really didn't do it today. They both agreed that they didn't like sanctions, but Russia really didn't come forth with any major offer of aid, nor did Greece evidently ask for that type of assistance. Moreover, Russia didn't even end the sanctions on the import of Greek food and meat products, which would have been a special concession for Greece. Instead, Putin essentially said that Greece is a part of the EU, the Russian sanctions are against the EU in total, and therefore Greece doesn't get any sort of concession vis-a-vis the export of its products to Russia. Russia is in dire financial circumstances, and it is unlikely that it could provide any real substantive support for Greece, which owes obviously billions of dollars back to Germany and to other EU countries. Russia faces its own financial crisis, inflation is high, the price of oil is still down, and therefore Russia faces significant budget deficits of its own. Indeed, it looks like it's going to have to pay upwards of $50 billion from its own reserve funds just to balance the budget in 2015. So Russia doesn't have any money really to spare for Greece. All the money has to go to support the Russian economy, which, as I mentioned earlier, is in very difficult circumstances.